Gaveled.
Are we live? Sorry, are we live? Thank you. Great. Now back in our public meeting, and the first item is I'm going to ask our CAO to make an announcement with regard to new hires.
Okay, through the chair to council, it is with great pleasure that we have our new detachment commander. So Graham Kerr has brought him with him today. And so can I introduce Lee Dyson? So he'll be with us today and will be stepping into the shoes of the former detachment commander, Rod Weebs. He comes to us from the Gulf Islands. So he's worked in smaller communities and he comes with a wealth of experience. And he already is familiar with our beautiful city and region. Amongst other things, as you get to know him, is he's an avid mountain biker. So he knows a lot of the trails around here. And so just if you would join me in welcoming him to his first meeting with us. And he will also be giving the quarterly report and channeling his inner, I think his colleague has helped prepare that. So I think he will be bravely doing that in a couple weeks for council. So yes, I just wanted to make sure you knew who the new face in town was and thank our interim detachment commander, Graham Kerr, who has stewarded very well in the gap. Thank you.
Welcome. We'll now move to item 5, which is the public input period, and I'm going to ask our corporate officer to explain what the public input period is, because it's a new part of our procedures.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, in the new council procedure bylaw, which was adopted 2 weeks ago, there is a new public input period where members of the up to 3 members of the public may make oral comments, provide written submissions at a council meeting or committee of the whole meeting with respect to legislative matters such as bylaws, development variance permits, agreements, contracts, committee or commission recommendations, or council business. And you have a maximum of 2 minutes to speak. You have to confine your comments to items of relevance to the council agenda, and you can't speak to certain matters that are either like outside council's jurisdiction or a closed public hearing or things like that. So this is a new feature of the council procedure bylaw.
Thank you very much. So is there anybody in the audience that would like to speak for 2 minutes? Do we have anybody online that would like to provide public input? Great, thank you very much. We will now move to item 6, which is new business, 6.1, the airport project.
Through the chair to council, before I turn over briefly to Mr. Fraser, the report you have before you is basically requesting that we have a reallocation of some funds from something called the Community Economic Recovery Program, also known as CEREP, to reallocate funding to allow for the capping of the airport landfill and an extension of the runway for the capping purposes, and also some paving improvements. So it is basically your permission to get us to proceed with a reallocation that's been approved in principle by CEREP, that unused funds can be used to improve various components of the airport on the air side and also the parking area. Mr. Fraser, if you have any brief comments, and we also have Ms. Dennison, if you have any questions about how this shifts the allocation of funding from other grants. Thank you.
Your Worship, good evening. I don't have too many comments other than this is a fantastic opportunity for us to utilize some grant funds, close to $800,000, where we can do some of the planned work we had planned for 2028, I believe, in this year's budget, but fully funded by the SAREP grant. Thank you.
So Elliot.
I had a question about whether there's a deadline to do the projects or lose the funding, and whether we're able to meet those deadlines.
Your Worship, there is a deadline. I believe it's the end of June for us to utilize those funds, or we would not be eligible for that $800,000.
Thank you, Mayor. Given that this is related to the 2024 and 2025 financial plans, what would the implications be to the financial planning process this year and potential tax increases if we opt, or if we do this or don't do this? Like, what is currently in the plan, and how might this change, through the chair to staff, how might this change taxation levels?
Through the chair, this is a complicated this project as we pivot the funding. What we're seeing is in 2028 and 2029, there could be a need to use the infrastructure reserve fund for the actual construction of capping the landfill. It's estimated at 1.5 million, but of course, as the report says, that is just an estimate at this point. In the background, the reason we say there's a potential impact is because we are looking in to see if the Community Works Fund would fund this. So right now, because it's 2028 and 2029, we are working on building up that infrastructure reserve. We are hoping to use that for the building costs that we know will be coming down to become a reality in those years. So there is some funding. It cuts into some savings for building improvements is essentially what it would do in a worst case scenario. So we wouldn't increase taxes at this point in time.
Just a follow-up question. So the funds and the project that would need to be completed by June of this year, while the overall project is about capping and paving, it's the paving that would need to be completed, or the scoping of the landfill. Like, what would actually need to be done by June 2025? I think I see them both in here, but just reiterate that.
Through the chair, Mr. Fraser, would you like to answer this question, please?
Yes, I would, through the chair. Would love to. So it's actually 3 projects in one. So one of them is the design for the landfill capping. So that's something that we need to do, best practices, environmental standards. And originally that was budgeted to do, but it proved too expensive to extend the runway over the landfill, pardon me. So that proved too expensive. So this is a shift to just design the simple cap for the landfill. We'll need to fund that in the future. So this does the design for that. And then the other 2 things are the paving pieces of the apron and air side, and also the parking lot as well. So the parking lot paving, apron paving would be done prior to June, if approved, and also the design for the landfill cap, which needs to be done. And the actual capping part of that project would be later in the future.
Thank you.
You'd like to put
Make the motion? Yep. I move that council direct staff to amend City of Pell River 5-year financial plan bylaw 2742-2024 for the airport runway extension phase 1 project to be replaced by 3 projects. 1, airport YPW paving in 2024 for $760,000 funded by the Community Economic Recovery Infrastructure Program, CEREP, to airport runway 27 and landfill capping design in 2024 for $40,127 funded by CEREP, and 3, airport runway 27 and landfill capping construction in 2026 for $1.5 million funded by the City Buildings and Infrastructure Reserve, and that the upcoming draft of the City of Pell River 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan Bylaw 2751 be updated to remove the 2 projects, Airport Apron and Taxiway Bravo paving for $400,000 in 2028 and airport parking lot paving for $400,000 in 2029, and further that these changes be reflected as carry forward projects in the upcoming draft City of Pell River 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan Bylaw 2751 without increasing the property tax levy.
Councillor Palm, any further discussion before I call the motion? All in favor? Motion is passed unanimously. Now move to legislative matters 7.1. Draft Bylaw 2775.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This report carries out direction provided at the Committee of Whole meeting on December 17th, 2024, to amend the Waterworks Regulation and Rates Bylaw to increase all rates by 4% annually for the years 2025, 2026, and 2027, since the water utility rate schedule expired in 2024. Refer to Appendix A of the report for the current bylaw and to Appendix B for the proposed bylaw. The proposed rate increases would increase the single-family residential rate by $14 in 2025, $15 in 2026, and $16 in 2027. Increasing the water user fees would result in an increase in revenue of approximately $120,000 annually. This increase partially funds operating cost increases and the transfer to the Water Capital Reserve Fund, which must fund the estimated $42 million in water capital in the upcoming 25 years. With that, I'll conclude the presentation and thank you for your time.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through the mayor to the CFO, I recall us talking about these fees. I don't know if it was last year or the year before, and that we had determined to increase at a rate lower than what the actual cost increases were, or was that a different utility?
Through the chair, that was the sewer utility.
So are these increases on par with what our actual cost increase are for operations, or are they slightly more to allow for extra reserves, or what is the plan?
Through the chair, a portion will be for operational cost increases, and a portion will be to increase the transfer to the reserves.
Additional questions?
I can move the motion.
Motion, please.
I move that City of Pell River Council Waterworks Regulations and Rates Bylaw 2425-2015, Amendment Bylaw 2775-2025 be read a first, second, and third time.
Second by Councillor Almeida. Any further discussion before I call the motion? All in favor? Opposed? The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Wrong button. Councillor Dowd, would you read the next item while I try and recover the system?
Well, the next item, Mr. Mayor, I think is item 7.2, the proposed bylaw 2772 on council remuneration. And I see that Councillor Elliott had her hand up.
Councillor Elliott.
I'd make the motion and see if we can move forward from there. I move that City of Pell River Council Remuneration Bylaw 2772 2024 be adopted.
Isaacson. Councillor
Yeah, I just had one question for staff that came up in an email today related to the benefits part of the policy. There was a question as to whether the benefits portion of the policy, what it encompasses. And so my understanding was that it was related to health benefits, for example, dental or eye care or physio, and that it doesn't include things like sick leave and short-term disability, et cetera. And could I just, through the mayor to staff, clarify the whether or not things like sick leave and short-term disability are included in the benefits?
Okay. Through the chair, if I could ask Ms. Walls to respond to this. Thank you.
Through the chair, the sick leave benefits that staff staff receive would not apply to members of council. Members of council aren't employees, so they're not entitled to that. The bylaw also states that members of council also get 100% of their remuneration while on a leave. So, and a sick leave says that they can continue to get sick leave says that staff continue to get wages while on a leave. So it wouldn't, separate things. The benefits included in this bylaw are, as you said, the healthcare, the vision, the dental, those benefits. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of staff? My question is there any municipality in BC of a comparable size to Powell River that has a similar bylaw?
Through the chair, if I can ask Ms. Walls if in her research that whether or not she's come across this. Thank you.
Your Worship, this bylaw has similarities with other municipalities. I would have to look up all of the remuneration bylaws of all other municipalities of our size or similar to our size to see if they were similar to ours. Unfortunately, I don't have that information on hand.
Okay, so from my own research, there are no other municipalities, and I certainly will continue to oppose this motion. Any further comment? Councillor Palm.
Yes, Your Worship, I'm glad to see that this is on the agenda today for discussion. It was originally intended to come forward at an earlier date when I was away for the last couple of weeks, and just wanted to say a couple of things. Just for clarity, I think I made the motion to hold council's remuneration at its present level throughout the remainder of this term. I had no intent other than that, and it certainly wasn't to weigh in on a future council's prerogative in terms of remuneration. This sets a bar of 2 to 4% down the road for the next term. That's council's prerogative to discuss. They can rescind this, they can do whatever they want with the rest of the motion that's before us in terms of all the other items here. And I'm sure that they will be revisiting this when it comes forward, because I'm just going to say one thing. It is crystal clear to me, after being away for the last 2 weeks with my family on vacation, which I've rarely done in my 16 years. I've taken 2 vacations, one last year, one this one since I've been retired. The rest of my years, I've been here in this chamber. I may have missed 5 meetings over the 14 years. And to do this job properly, you need to be here. You need to be present, because even in the 2 weeks I've been away, I've missed a great deal. And it's not easy catching up on all the innuendos that are tossed around it from meeting to meeting. So I'm speaking against this motion. I would hope that council just looked after their own remuneration while they're in office this term and not go further down to the road to the next term, whoever is elected and are in these seats. So, Your Worship, I can't make it any plainer than that. This is against every bone in my body in terms of the staff time that's gone into this when we're busy with much bigger items to deal with this term. And this should not have been on our table today. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any further discussion before I call the motion? All in favor of the motion? Opposed? The motion passes 5-2. We'll now move to item 7.3, 2025 5-year financial plan draft 2.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. I'm presenting draft 2 of the proposed 2025 5-year financial plan. First, I'll start with a recap on where the city is at in the budget process. In May, Council set the 2025 budget schedule. In December, draft 1 was presented and discussed at 2 meetings. In January, the property assessment analysis was presented and an in-person budget open house was hosted. Concurrently, online engagement surveys were open to the public, and then in February, the budget engagement results were presented. The committee provided direction for draft 2 throughout this whole process, which is summarized in Appendix A of the report. But before we dive into draft 2, I'll recap draft 1, which proposed a property tax increase of 11.4%, resulting mainly from inflation and insufficient capital savings. Much of the city's capital, which has a cost base of about $330 million, is due for replacement, as shown on the timeline on the screen. Many decades of zero to minimal property tax increases resulted in insufficient savings for future capital costs. As a result, savings must be accelerated to meet the replacement and major upgrade requirements. This building age chart highlights 4 key buildings that require major upgrades or replacement. These buildings are the Recreation Center, City Hall, Public Works, and the main fire hall. These buildings are between 50 and 65 years old and have a cost of $27 million to build and upgrade. There are no savings for replacing or completing major upgrades to these buildings, which are at or beyond the end of useful life. The capital plan does not include the cost for these projects since a building's master plan would be required to obtain a reasonable estimate. So as discussed in draft 1, staff have requested a building master plan be included as a project so that reasonable estimates can be forecasted. Once staff have those forecasts, those estimates could be included in the 2026 plan. The capital savings versus spending chart on the screen shows the total capital costs over the next 5 years at $62 million, which also equals the savings. Again, these do not include the costs for the previously mentioned buildings. When we talk about reserves, we want to be looking at about 100 years out. It really depends on what the reserve is for to decipher if the balance is sufficient. I use the example of the sewer reserve. Right before the consolidated wastewater treatment plant, that sewer reserve needed over 20 million in it. After it was completed, an appropriate balance could be between 2 and 5 million, but then it would need to grow over time. So reserves are a complex item to analyze, but when you step back and look at a 100-year forecast, the blue bars on the top forecast that we continue to contribute to the capital reserves with what we are contributing in 2025. And the blue bars at the bottom are the replacement costs of our assets. Of course, those are estimates. And then the green line shows the reserve balance, which dips below 0 in about 12 years. Now that we have recapped draft 1, let's talk through the committee motions that were made for draft 2. The first motion was to increase the water user fee by 4%, and that was completed moments ago. The next motion was for the city to request that the QRD contribute the maximum funding permitted in the Sub-Regional Recreation Contribution Service Establishment bylaw. The city sent this request to the QRD, but since the cutoff for Draft 2 report, the QRD board has voted to contribute $234,500. This is approximately $80,000 less than the maximum contribution permitted in the bylaw. So as a result, the next 2025 financial plan presented in March will include a 0.3% increase to property taxes. The next motion relates to setting the budget for the community forest grants to nonprofit organization, which is set at the council's sole discretion. The committee directed that the community forest grants to nonprofits equal 10% of the dividend to a maximum of $250,000. This results in a total of $60,000 for community forest grants to nonprofit organizations in 2025, which would increase the property tax by about 0.2%. The property tax increases because both community forest and property tax fund the majority of the recreation complex costs. So when the community forest dividends are granted to external organizations, property taxes need to increase to compensate for the decrease in the funding to the city. The next motion was to provide an option to increase the property tax by $600,000 to fund a transfer to the Property Tax Stabilization Reserve. This transfer would increase property taxes by about 2.5%. The majority of Draft 2, this report focuses on this final motion here, which is to provide options to reduce the property tax increase to 5%. The first three options are recommendations by staff as a result of new information since Draft 1. The first option is to defer the fire ladder truck purchase from 2026 to 2030 as a result of a useful life extension approval received after Draft 1. This results in a 2.5% property tax decrease in 2025. Option number 2 is to include a one-time purchase of 6,000 automatic recycling collection carts, which increases the 2025 property tax by 2.8%. These carts would match the new garbage and organics carts, which can be picked up by trucks automatically rather than by hand. This would reduce injuries and would increase efficiencies. The third option is to defer the salt shed replacement project, which would reduce property taxes in 2025 by 1%. The option number 4 is to amend the Community Forest Reserve Fund bylaw, which result in a 2.5% decrease in the 2025 property taxes and further property tax reductions in future years. For background, the city fully owns and controls the Community Forest Corporation, and the corporation earns a profit, which is then transferred to the city as a dividend. The dividend is transferred to the city's Community Forest Reserve Fund, which has been established by the Reserve Fund bylaw. This bylaw was established in 2008 and may be amended by council. The current bylaw restricts the use of this reserve fund to capital grants to NPOs and capital projects for the city that are not of a regular nature. This has been interpreted to be generally parks and recreations projects. So currently there are no eligible city projects for its own community forest funding in 2025, but amending the bylaw could unlock some of those funds for other projects that have been approved and are funded by property tax. Option number 5 is to decrease the 2025 capital road upgrade budget from $1.7 million to $1.3 million. This is a $500,000 decrease that would save 1.9% in property tax. This would pave 362 less meters of road, deferring this work to future years. The sixth option is to eliminate the $400,000 transfer to the RCMP Reserve Fund, which would decrease the forecasted reserve balance from $1.2 million to $800,000. This would result in lower reserve balance to fund a potential major crime. It would also lower the funds available to smooth out the transition from paying 70% to 90% of the RCMP costs, which is forecasted to occur in 2031. Option number 7 is to eliminate grants to nonprofit organizations. The partial year cost of these grants for 2025 is $382,000, and the ongoing full year cost is approximately $500,000. These grants do not include community forest grants to nonprofit organizations or permissive tax exemptions. The 2025 permissive tax exemption bylaws have been adopted by council. but should future property tax decreases beyond 2025 be sought by council, the impact to an average single-family dwelling from the $580,000 in permissive tax exemptions is $62 annually. Option number 8 is to increase recreation fees by, and here is where I must own up to a miscommunication and an error. The report says 10%, but the numbers presented are actually a 16% increase. So our apologies for that. I've already alerted admin, and should council wish to make a motion relating to this option, admin will be ready to amend the motion accordingly to reflect a 16% increase. Option number 9 is to use the BC Transit COVID Restart funding of $112,000 held by BC Transit to offset the BC Transit bill in 2025. Option number 10 is to cancel the $100,000 cultural master plan project to decrease property taxes by 0.4%. Option number 11 is to eliminate the $80,000 social planner position, which is vacant, and apply a social lens to city projects and services instead. This would also eliminate the $20,000 social cohesion project, which would be carried out by the social planner. Options 12 and 13 were per direction from the Committee of the Whole and have been discussed already. The changes, so in summary, the changes to the property tax there can be seen in the report as a waterfall graph on pages 4 and 5. The property tax decrease options are 12.7%. This would result in a property tax decrease of 1.3%. All of the property tax increase options are 5.5%, and that would result in a total property tax increase of 16.9%. Now, the net of all of those increases and decreases, the 13 options placed before council is 7.1%, and that would result in a total 4.3% increase to property tax. Circling back to the recommendation, staff have recommended the first 3 options presented be included in the 2025 financial plan, since these would have been options presented in the normal course of the budget deliberations as new information does become available between drafts. Council could use the wording provided in the recommendation to craft a motion relating to the remaining 10 options should council choose to do so. As a reminder, Community Charter Sections 164 to 166 requires that the financial plan bylaw be adopted before the property tax rate bylaw, and that both bylaws be adopted before May 15th annually. For next steps, direction received at this special council meeting will be included in the City of Powell River 2025 to 2029 Financial Plan Bylaw number 2751, which will be proposed for first, second, and third readings at the regular council meeting on March 20th, and then subsequently proposed for adoption. The City of Powell River 2025 Property Tax Rates Bylaw number 2752 will then be deliberated and adopted in April and possibly into early May. With that, I thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer questions. And we'll also note that we have the respective staff attending virtually to assist in answering any questions you may have.
I have a question perhaps for staff as well as for us about the best way of moving through this in an efficient manner. So for example, rather than drafting one motion and trying to get agree on all of the items, would it make sense for a council member who has a specific cut or change in mind to propose that and for us to vote on that and then make one overall motion? I'm just trying to make sure that we can all agree on what a good process will be to move through these. And so looking for if Mayor as chair has prepared that in advance, or whether staff have recommendations.
Through the chair, Mr. Fleming, I think what Councillor Isaacson is proposing is feasible. I'm wondering if you could provide some guidance around that. Thank you.
Yeah, I concur, Your Worship. I think to start with, it would be, there's the 3 recommendations on the table to start with that were part of the presentation. If council wants to start there with that recommendation, and then from there could consider any individual ones on a case-by-case basis that you wish to discuss and make a decision on, because they're not in the plan unless you pass a resolution saying that there will be making that amendment to the financial plan.
Okay. So my suggestion, which I think concurs with you, is if each councillor had the opportunity to say which of the items that our CFO presented they would like to discuss, perhaps at the end, it would only be 10 out of 12. But if there's a consensus, we would just go around the table and then we would identify the ones that don't require any further discussion, could be voted on as a whole. Councillor Doubt.
Councillor Elliott had her hand up, but I'll let her talk after me. Sorry. Plunging into the line here. But I kind of like what the corporate officer suggested. We've got a report in front of us. It's got 3 recommended changes from staff. They'd like us to think about them. I think if somebody wants to think about one of these 3, probably number 1 would be the place to start. Make a motion to deal with number 1, and we can talk about it and either accept it or reject it. As a council, we can go through those, and then there's the other long list of possible recommendations. And if a councillor wants to make one of those possible recommendations, they could do it. Now, if we get through all those, we'll probably be finished. And if nobody wants to make any other recommendations, we could go home. But I think that's a reasonable way to go about it. We've got a report with recommendation 1, 2, 3 on it that staff has recommended. We could go through those, and then we could look at the long list of possible recommendations, the options that staff have given us according to our request to them to do that, and we could choose whether we want to do those cuts or not. But I'd rather get on with debating what we're going to do about fire trucks and recycling bins, etc.
So I like everybody's ideas, and I think the easiest way to do is to treat all the options a bit like a consent agenda. If there's something you want pulled out because you don't agree with it, we pull out stuff and then we make a motion for everything that's remaining, and then we go back and talk individually about the ones we've pulled out.
Councillor Armida.
Just curious if we can ask some questions first before we start debating things. No.
I guess we do not have a consensus, so we'll do it the way that is normally done. We will have a question period, and then if there is agreement, somebody can put a motion forward, and we'll vote on that motion. So, Councillor Doubt.
I'd like to make a motion to defer the fire ladder truck purchase.
I think we're doing a question period first. He just said so.
I said I'd like to make a motion. That's what I'd like to do. We'll see if it gets seconded. If it does, then we can debate it.
It's a rebel.
Seconded by Councillor Isaacson. Anybody like to discuss?
I made the motion. I'll just go ahead. I see staff's recommendation that they think that we can do this. It would be reasonable. As always, if you defer a purchase, you know it's going to go up by at least 4 or 5% a year, every year that you defer it. The price will be higher when we defer it, when we get it later. But there's a lot of people in town that have told me they'd like to see a lower increase in taxes. Looking at major purchases and what we can defer is a reasonable thing to do. This would, according to staff, save us a 2.5% decrease in our tax assessment that we would have to get. So I think we should think about doing it. Even with realizing that about 3 years down the road, the price tag's going to be higher.
Councillor Armida.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm perfectly fine with the motion. I was just wanted to confirm with the corporate officer because Councillor Doubt just went to the basic number 1 and skipped over the initial paragraph of the recommendation that talked about the 5-year financial plan bylaw, and just wanted to confirm that we did or did not have to verbalize that for the record.
It's in your worship. It's in the staff report. So from my perspective, the recommendation on the table includes that, with number 1 being the question before council right now.
Thank you.
Any additional questions, comments before we move the motion? All in favor of the motion? Passed unanimously. Councillor Armita.
Moving on to number 2, I have a question for staff, either for the CFO or for Mr. Fraser. I have lived in communities before with automated recycling carts, so I do like the concept of them, but as we're trying to cut some cost, I'm a little curious about this because it wasn't on the agenda prior to today. I know when we got our green bins last year, that was due to some grant funding, and I'm just curious if there's any grant funding that is involved in this transaction that is coming up at this time, or this is just straight municipality covered?
Through the chair, I'm happy to answer that one, Mr. Fraser. And I both looked into this. We reached out to our sustainability planner and asked if there are any grants or potential grants for this item. So there's no grants that would apply to this purchase. An option for consideration would be to defer this purchase for a few years and look for grants, wait for grants. So those are 2 different approaches that could be taken.
A second follow-up, if you don't mind. Kind of in conjunction with this to the CFO, as the recycling carts is a 2.8% increase, and then I'm jumping further ahead to the transfer to the property tax stabilization is a 2.5% increase, which combined add up to 5.3%. So hypothetically, if council chose not to go with either of those options, would that basically eliminate 5.3% from the property tax increase? If we chose not to acquire the carts and we chose not to increase the transfer to the property tax stabilization fund?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Thank you.
I would like to put a motion that we remove the purchase of automated recycling collection bins. And if there's a seconder, I'll speak to my rationale.
Move or move?
Move to remove. Thank you. So my rationale is straightforward. So when I saw this, I started looking at the opportunities to utilize the garbage bin as a recycling bin as one option. Secondly, I did have the opportunity going around the neighborhood and observing how many carts are actually out, and with the permission of neighbors, looked in the carts of the garbage and realizing that with a commitment from the community, which we could do through a good communication program, people could realize that significant tax savings could be made if you simply did not put liquid stuff into the garbage so that it could be used for recycling. The third option is, in order to ensure safety of our staff, we could simply limit the amount of recycling to 10 pounds, 15 pounds, whatever is deemed reasonable. So that's my rationale. I think any one of those 3 would provide. And the final opportunity is community watch. So this is a perfect opportunity to help build community involvement, so that very simply, if people are observing that there's recycling, that they may go back to the original RRR, which is reduce, reuse, and recycle. So there may be more opportunities for us to demonstrate that Powell River is more than just talking about environment. And this is a perfect example where we're going to take the 3 R's very seriously. Whose hand was up first? Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I have had the opportunity to talk to a person who was doing the work of picking up the recycle bins and putting them in the truck. And it's the not necessarily the weight, it's the actual motion of having to pick them up from the ground with some of them having handles, some of them not, and manually put it in the truck because the truck doesn't have an automatic arm for all of the various different sizes of recycling bins. So that person did get injured and couldn't do that job anymore because of the repetitive nature of it. So I don't know how we're doing as far as people doing that job, but I have a suspicion that it's a high injury job and isn't a great way to do it. Buying the bins with the little metal arms that we can use would help. So, and I'm aware of that. I think I might be okay with postponing it to next year and using this year to look for better granting opportunities, because we have had grants in the past to cover at least part of the costs of our bins. And if we took more time to do that, we might find it, but I'm not okay with removing it altogether. I'm thinking maybe deferring it 1 year and using that year to, as our CFO suggested, find granting opportunities might be the prudent way to go.
Are you recommending a amendment?
I would, if that would please your worship.
I'm fine with putting that amendment forward.
So you'd second my amendment to change a motion to deferring it for a year?
Correct. Councillor Isaacson and then Councillor Doubt.
We're speaking to the amendment at this time.
Yeah, so I feel like my comments would reference both of whether it's the amendment or the main motion. It's one of these things that I support in principle, but I need more information. And so that would include possible grant opportunities, understanding the scale of the injuries. So I've heard anecdotes, but I don't actually know what the cost is to city and workers when it comes to repetitive strain injuries in this item. And I had the exact same idea that Mayor Wasno had in terms of every week we only put out two, either, well, green waste every week and then either recycling or garbage. And, could the garbage one be used for recycling? I think it's good in theory, but the actual practice of it might be hard. We might end up mixing up our recycling and garbage and having our recycling being refused by those that process our recycling. So it would need to be thought out, but because I have enough questions and need more information, I support deferring it so that we can get that more information and understand the rationale and what the alternatives could be. But I don't support including it this year, and so support the deferral or would support the main motion for this year. Thank you.
So, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, I did have my hand up. I think it was to talk about a motion that's different than what we're talking about now. If we accepted the amendment, we're not talking about the same thing that the motion was talking about, but here we are. So I'm just going to give you my opinion about what we should do with purchasing automatic recycling collection carts. I don't think we should do it. It's a spending item that's just come up between the last budget meeting and this budget meeting. It wasn't before us before. It involves collecting another $692,000 in taxes. And we have other things that are collecting another $600,000 in taxes, and if you go to add on, and if we're trying to save money on the budget, adding additional taxation doesn't seem like a good way to go to me. I'd rather make a decision now than defer the decision to next year. I think we get paid to make decisions. We should probably do what we're going to do this year instead of putting it off and arguing next year. I had some questions about it, so I went out and tried to answer the questions myself. Went out and looked beside my shop, and I realized that there was a name of the manufacturer of the carts we use. The carts we use for garbage and the carts we use for organics, and they're made, by a nice company that constructs them all very scientifically and environmentally acceptably in California. I've been getting letters from people who say, "Why don't you buy Canadian? We're going to spend $600 $190,000 on a product, I'd like to know if we could get it in Canada first. It's one of the questions I have. The other question I'd like to have answered before I agreed to do it was just exactly what is the cost of injuries in the recycling program right now? Do we have a high injury rate? And what's being done if we do? Because simply saying, yeah, we've got a high injury rate and we're going to hopefully buy new carts next year doesn't really answer the question. I'd like to have more details. So right now, I can't support purchasing more recycling carts this year or next year. So I'm really not sure how to vote because I'm not sure what we're voting on.
Okay, well, we have an amendment on the floor right now. Councillor Palm, did you want to speak to the amendment?
Yes, Your Worship, I would like to speak to the amendment. I'm in favor of the amendment. And I just have a couple of things to say in regards to our services, and that is the add-on, the last add-on was organics. We have bins for that presently. We do not have a place in our community to deal with organics. We have to ship them out of town. It's an horrendous cost, which has gone up dramatically because of volume. So food for thought, whether it's this year or next year, I'd just like to state, until we have a place in town where we can take our organics, I'm against collection, and we should be using that bin for recycling presently, reducing our costs greatly without having to ship those organics out, which have gone through the roof, and we could use that cart for that purpose of recycling this year, and that would really cut our costs overall. So that's food for thought, whether it's this year or next year, but it should be a discussion until we have a place to take our organics.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to address your last point, we do now have a place where the organics can be delivered. It's the Resource Recovery Center, and it's either open now for collection, or it will be imminently. That was just announced at the RD meeting yesterday. But to move on, I also I could support this amendment. My principal concern is injuries. I know we have at least one employee of the city who is being accommodated due to an injury. Lifting and twisting is the #1 way to screw up backs. I believe that was the situation here. I also, I'm concerned. I did work for an agency that spent millions of dollars to save injuries, and it paid off inside of 3 years due to the cost of WCB to that agency. So I also really want to know numbers, but it's very attractive to wait and in hopes of grants. So I really want to know numbers on injuries. I would love it if the mayor's suggestion would work, but watching the last 10 years of the regional waste plan, solid waste plan, trying to educate the local community, it really has been very slow. So I also would love it if staff, I don't think this has been looked into, but if staff might have an idea on how to use garbage bins and like label them or something so that the staff who picks this up would know, and it would help residents to responsibly put what was to be disposed of, either recycling or garbage, in the cart that could be used for two purposes, but I really don't have too much optimism about that. However, that's another huge question in my mind. And I'm not willing to make a a motion for those two questions, but I'd sure love the answers to them. Thank you.
Point of information. For the mover of the amendment, was it the intention to defer the purchase or to defer the discussion?
My intention was to defer the purchase to next year's budget, and the hope was that we could search for grants in the meantime that might make that cheaper even next year. And also, we could request a report at some time for the additional information that everybody's looking for. I don't know that we need to do that today.
Okay, we have a amendment on the floor. Any further discussion? All the motion, all in favor? Opposed? We have motion passes with one opposed. We'll now go to the main motion as amended. Yes, Councillor Doudt.
Yeah. I would be way happier if it was clear that we would have to make a positive decision to actually purchase the carts in 2026, if that's what we were going to do. The language keeps changing, but you know, I would like to know. I'm not prepared to vote on something that looks like we're saying we're not going to have the 2% increase this year. We're going to have it next year. If what we're going to do is make a decision next year, I think that's reasonable. But what are we deciding?
We have a main motion. Any further discussion? Councillor Isaacson.
I think Councillor.
I'm sorry to be doing this, but the motion that's now up there is that staff be directed to defer the purchase of automatic recycling carts to the 2026 budget process, which means that I would think the draft is going to come out with a 2.8% increase to cover the purchase of recycling carts.
Well, I think there's going to be a considerable amount of information provided to council long before the 2026 budget process. And at any time, councillor can move a motion forward on the basis of the information and staff report that's been presented to us. Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think we're assuming that we would get a staff report with all the information that we want, but the way that it's worded right now, I think would result in this purchase being in next year's budget, and then we might be in the same situation that we are in now. So I guess my question through the Mayor to staff is, a lot of questions and ideas have been raised today. What direction would you need to make sure that the information that we've been discussing would be in front of council when this sort of decision comes up next time?
Through the chair, if I might jump in, I think what you're looking for is to direct staff to bring back a report with options that include purchasing automatic recycling carts. And so that would be options with information about the cost versus benefits of injuries, the cost versus benefits of the weight of recycling versus the weight of garbage, and also options for potential funding that may come available next year that we couldn't find this year. Mr. Fraser, would you agree I've summed that up? Thank you.
Your Worship, yes, I would agree with that. I think we're heading down that direction. That's probably the right way to do it, and bring back a report answering as many questions as we can, and do that later and well in advance of the 2026 budget process.
We have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? The motion passes with one opposed. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. The suggestion made by the CAO, I'd like to make that as a motion, if that's necessary, or is it understood?
Through the chair, I believe that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, that staff bring back information, the information as listed to do with injury stats, education of, let's see, injury stats, education of the public, and potential for grant funding for the bins. It's pretty vague.
Councillor Almeida. Southcott, would you like to further comment?
The comments that I already made with regard to my concern for lifting and twisting, which is the mechanism to get bins, the contents of bins into garbage trucks, I'll just reassert that. I'm willing to take the risk for a year, looking for grants, because we did have grants to cover previous bins. I also would like reporting from staff to include reference to education or attempts at education of the public with regard to separation of waste. I don't know how to put this so that it's simple. That would pertain to these specific bins.
We have a
Maybe that could be deleted.
We have a motion that's been seconded. Any further discussion?
Curious about what the motion is.
Through the chair, if you might give me just a minute to work with staff so we can put something on the screen for you. Thank you.
If I may, I'd just like to simplify this back to injury statistics, and I think I'd be satisfied simply with that as a motion to direct staff to bring back a report to us.
Through the chair, Ms. Walls, I've just sent you something that I think would work, and maybe Mr. Stevens could just check that. So, and it does simplify things. So it's basically that staff be directed to bring a report to council with research on impacts and options for the purchase of recycling bins prior to the 2026 budget.
We have a motion that's been seconded. Further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? We have the motion passing with one opposed. Councilor Almeida.
Thank you, Mayor. We've had a little conversation about the safety impact of the motion that our workers do in terms of waste and recycling. I'm going to throw out an idea here that might alleviate or help with some of that right now that has nothing to do with any extra capital costs. Back in November 2022, when I was just a newbie counselor, I asked the CFO what our revenue was on the garbage tag program. And at the time, in the calendar year of 2022, the city had a grand total of $450, she reported back, of revenue from garbage tags. And I've always thought, ever since we had the bin system, that the garbage tag program was just an overkill and leading to injury, because the answer I had here is that our municipal workers will dump the bin, then load the tagged bag into the bin for a second dump. And yesterday I saw a house in my community with 3 bags that, I kid you not, could have had a human inside them. They were that stuffed. And so for the less than $1,000 that we're generating in revenue as a city, I feel like this would be a simple adjustment to make. And so I would like to move, if anyone wants to follow along, I'd like to move that we eliminate our garbage tag system.
Second.
Wanted to move on to our list of motions here. I wonder if I could group a few, and if people disagree, they just don't have to second it. I would move that we would include item 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11. And I'll give people a minute to. And if we could put that up on the screen so people know which numbers I've cited, and then we can give people a minute to flip through that and see if they agree or disagree.
Through the chair, Councillor Elliott, could you please repeat those numbers?
3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Second for discussion and have a question when the opportunity comes. Okay. My question was to the CFO regarding number 8. The report provided said a 10% increase. You verbally said 16%. I just wanted to confirm because the numbers in the report also gave examples of a 10% increase, but you're definitely 16% is so if the day pass is $6 right now, we're looking at it being almost $7 next year, basically.
Through the chair, that is correct. I have checked with Mr. Bretzlaff, and the examples given are a 10% increase within the writing of that idea, but the actual numbers used were a 16% increase. A 10% increase would be a 0.3, for 2025 would be a 0.3% decrease. Yeah.
So I'm supporting Councillor Elliott's 5 items. So we have Councillor Isaacson and Councillor Doubt.
I
7, but yeah.
I don't support this motion. I don't support the items that reduce transfers to reserves. I think all of the transfers, part of the challenging situation that we are in financially as a city right now is because over the years, the easiest thing to cut from a budget has been transfers to reserves. And then when the time comes to pay for capital upgrades, et cetera, buy equipment, we don't have those reserves there. And we're just passing the buck on to the next council, the next generation of taxpayers in 5, 10, 20 years. And so while transfers to reserves can, yes, cut the pain this year, they are, I don't feel like they, I don't
think we need to debate this. It's simply, you've stated your opinion. That would be removed from the motion. The idea is, do we actually get to a motion with a number on that we collectively can vote on?
Well,
So which number was that then?
Okay, 5. So I would then move to amend the motion and remove, well, I'll do it one at a time so that we don't get into the situation. I move an amendment to remove item 5 from this list, which would mean that I don't want to do that.
Right. We have a seconder? Seconded. Further discussion? Councillor Doubt.
I'd like to amend the motion to remove items 6, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Basically, the result of that will be to deal with them individually so we can actually talk about one issue at a time and make a decision.
Okay, what I'm hearing is,
That's a motion.
Well, we're dealing with the First Amendment first.
but first,
I made a motion to make an amendment, Mr. Mayor, and that people have been doing that all through the entire meeting. Councillor Isaacson made a motion.
Councillor Doubt,
I made an
understand,
amendment.
but we can be here till 2 in the morning. Your motion has made it clear that you are not in favor, and we agreed there had to be unanimous support to put this through. So the only item left is if there's unanimous support for item 3, we can continue. If not, we'll just go back to an item by item discussion.
Point of
Southcott.
Point of information. I'm unclear what we're doing. I support Councillor Doubt's intention, which is to address them individually. I think we have enough diversity of views on this council that I just don't want to do this. I want to go through them one at a time.
Okay.
Councillor Elliott, are you fine with withdrawing your motion?
I can withdraw.
Thank you. All right. We'll now deal with each item individually. Councillor Isaacson.
I move that we defer the salt shed project.
Councillor Almeida. Discussion.
My rationale being that we have a lot of projects and purchases on the docket, and we often don't get to them on an annual basis. There's just so many things going on. And so if staff know that this is not likely to happen, let's put it in the year when it actually will happen. Thank you.
Great. Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor? Passed unanimously. Any additional motions? Guard. Yes.
I would move item 5 to decrease the capital road upgrade by 1.9%.
Seconder for the motion. For Southcott, seconded. Any discussion? Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you. I don't support this given the state of our roads in this community. I know road paving is expensive, but when we don't do it, this is again passing the buck a little bit further down the road. And I feel like our reserves for capital road upgrades are sufficient as is. And I think it's a decision that, yes, would decrease taxes this year, but again, doesn't resolve some of the ongoing financial challenges, and also doesn't address a common complaint, which is the status of our roads. Thank you.
Councillor Doe.
Yeah, and I feel the same way. And we did some paving this year, and when we got the response to our request for proposals from the paving company for what the project was, we had a meeting of council to talk about which projects weren't going to get done. So last year we did less than we wanted to within the year, and we also do less than is required to just simply maintain our roads in a usable condition for the future. Every council studies what it costs to maintain their roads if they're going to repair them all to an acceptable level, and we don't spend enough to do that right now. Reducing it even more means our roads are going to deteriorate more and faster, and push the costs of fixing the roads down to the next generation or the next year's taxpayers or one after. It's just deferring a cost that we know we have to make. We're not spending enough.
Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do support this. I don't agree. This is a capital expense. It's not a reserve. The city has in the past deferred road repairs, and yep, the roads get worse. This is not canning road repairs like has been done in past years, a while back now, but I would expect that if we defer the amount listed here for 455,000 approximately, it's only dropping it from 1.7 mil down to 1.3 mil. I would expect staff to prioritize. I would also expect that serious problems would get looked after. I would not expect that the road behind Cranberry Lake is going to get repaved anytime soon, and a few others like that don't get as much use as others. So I also am not of the view that this compounds as time goes on. it definitely can get worse, but I think we're in a particular crunch time now where we can afford to push this just a little bit, like a few other things. So maybe we don't have to make really big sacrifices.
Councillor Palm.
Thank you, Richard. Mr. Chair, I am in favor of keeping our funding for roads intact as was stipulated in the plan. I was holding portfolio for infrastructure and engineering and whatnot. That was primary concern of residents in the city, that many roads are in disrepair. And to cut that is against the community charter, which stipulates road, sewer, water explicitly. That's one of our main tasks. And we should keep the funding as is. As Councillor Doudt said, we reduced it last year. We shouldn't have done so. And this is one I can't support. Thank you.
So I'm going to comment on this. I'm in favor of the motion for a number of reasons. One is we have a very competent staff and they have brought this forward. We're well aware of the potential implications. Secondly, we are in a situation where we're moving through the shutdown of the mill, our major supplier of revenues from industrial taxation. I'm optimistic that there's an opportunity next year that the revenue that will be generated from the mill site will have an increased. There's also other opportunities associated with industry that would like to come in, whether it's the airport or other locations. So I think it is incorrect to assume that our revenue sources from other than taxation is going to remain stagnant. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. I'm in favor of the motion. What it does is it says instead of doing 1.397 kilometers of road, we're going to do 1.035 kilometers of road. I think it's a good balance for what we can, to try to affordably do. So I was here last term when our budget was under $1 million for roads each year, and it wasn't insufficient, and it did come up. And at this point in time, I think, we could do a slightly less roads. We're still doing over 1 kilometer of roads in our budget this year. So I think that works.
Councillor Amir.
I believe I'm the last one to speak, and based on what's been aired so far, it seems to be 3-3 to the left of me. So I'd like to propose a small amendment to maybe meet everyone in the middle. Staff has proposed a 1.9% increase, about $455,000. I'd like to propose, a 1.9% decrease, my mistake. I'd like to propose that we meet in the middle at road budget of 1.5 million to bring the decrease to a 1% decrease, so that it is not as less, but it's still saving some tax increase as well.
Motion put forward. Councillor Palm, are you
Second the amendment?
second? Okay, we have an amendment which has been seconded. Any further discussion before we vote?
Point of information, so the amendment would be to decrease, would add by 1.5 million? Is that what you?
I'll let the CFO do the math, but to bring the decrease from 1.9 to 1% on a tax increase, yeah. So instead of the 455 that staff presented, it would probably be cutting it down by 200 and change.
All clear with the amendment to favor? Vote. Motion passes with 2 opposed. We'll now go to the main motion as amended. All in favor? Opposed? The motion passes with 1 opposed.
Just I'm just looking at what's developing on the screen, and I think the motion ended up in a decrease in taxation, not an increase.
Correct.
That's we were voting on. Clarifying that. Yes, Councillor Elliott.
I would move item 6 to eliminate the 2025 transfer of RCMP reserve funds. No, not eliminate it. Eliminate 400,000 of it. Anyway, lowering that amount from 800 to 400, I think it was. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Seconded by Councillor Southcott.
So our RCMP reserve funds have been coming up, probably not at the same rate as what they would be forecasted here. We do at the end of each year take our operating surpluses from RCMP operating budget and also transfer those. And historically, we've been a little bit understaffed with RCMP, and that amount is also coming into those reserves each year because we end up spending less than what we budget for because our RCMP staffing level has been lower than what they're approved for in the budget. So these reserves are in addition to that operating surplus. And so I think we can afford to lower this reserve a little bit.
So Southcott.
Thank you, Worship. I have a question of staff, through the chair and or through your Worship. Is it true that the RCMP budget is enhanced by, or not budget, reserve is enhanced by the balance that the year-end financials, the difference between the budget and the year-end financials, does that go into the RCMP reserve?
Through the chair, if there is a variance, it does. One item to keep in mind is that because there has been over 6 or 7 years of very high vacancy rates, we don't fund the entire complement of 20 members by property tax because it early on did start resulting in such large, not just transfers to the reserves, but sometimes it would just fall to surplus, and surplus was growing quite rapidly. So what we have done is fund the about 16 members through property tax, and the remaining is through surplus should we need. But since it's been consistently around 14 or 15 members, we haven't needed to dip into surplus. So that decision was made years ago on how to do that estimate. So essentially, we're trying to tax for the actual cost that will incur in the year.
Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Isaacson.
Yeah, common trend for me tonight. I don't support motions that reduce transfers to reserves because we will be seeing quite a substantial increase to the RCMP budget when our community hits a population of 15,000, which staff have estimated to occur in 2031. And in saving for it now, it means when 2031 happens, we don't end up with a big increase in 1 year and we're able to smooth things over. And so this is a little bit of saving for the future as our community grows. So I'll keep banging the drum of not eliminating transfers to reserves. Thank you.
I'm going to continue with my drum that the city has tremendous opportunities to bring new industries into our city, which will significantly increase the business tax base. So I am in support of this motion. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Worship. I want to argue that I do not support this. I do want to see the money go into the reserve. We have no assurance at this point that the BIMCU insurance policy for major crimes is going to cover us. It's become more complicated from the latest information that I have. And money that we put into reserves can be shifted. So there's a second reason. If we need to, under certain conditions. So I don't support the reduction of this reserve fund. Thank you.
Councillor Doubt.
So, this reserve, the RCMP reserve fund, has been put into place and maintained, in my view, by the city for two reasons. The main reason was the fact that everyone knows the increase that is looming on the horizon because of our population into charges for RCMP services has the potential to rise very drastically between one election or one census and another. And if our population gets over 15,000, we're not very far from that right now, in a census, then we're going to have to pay a much higher percentage to the RCMP to cover the cost of policing. And what part of what this reserve is there for is to ease the burden on taxpayers when that event happens. So if we don't fund the reserve, what we're doing is saying, in the very likely event that our share of RCMP coverage goes up, we're going to stick that to the taxpayers in the year that it happens. Or maybe we'll do it late and we'll have to pay some retroactive. The other reason is for major crimes, because there is a major crimes unit that functions on Vancouver Island. But if they come, according to my understanding, to cover something like a murder in the city of Powell River, there are costs associated with that the city would have to pay. And that can come out of this RCMP transfer reserve. But if it's not there, you can't use it. So I don't think it's prudent to get rid of this reserve. I think we should keep it. And I like the mayor's confidence in the fact that new taxpayers will arrive to cover all this stuff on a sunny day. But I think we should keep the reserve in place.
Councillor Armida.
Mayor, I just want to confirm with the CFO. So the current RCMP reserve is sitting at around 800,000 right now. Is I'm reading this correctly?
Through the chair, the forecasted reserve balance at the end of 2025, it's forecasted to be 800,000 with the current, 1.2 million. If you were to remove this transfer to the reserve, your forecasted reserve at the end of 2025 would be 800,000.
So I'm going to beat my own drum, since that seems to be the theme, and make a similar motion as I did before. So staff have recommended 400,000. I also agree that cutting a reserve when we know we're going to have more RCMP funding needed is not maybe the wisest thing. So I would make a motion to reduce the RCMP reserve fund transfer to 200,000.
So this is an amendment to the motion on the floor? I am not, Councillor Elliott, are you seconding the amendment motion?
Yeah.
Okay,
We can get support for that. That's better than none.
Councillor Palm.
Your Worship, I'll just state overall my objection to the elimination of this transfer. It puts the city at risk on two fronts. One is the major crime that could cost anywhere from 100,000 to over millions. We do not want to be in that position. And secondly, your point where we may see growth through industry coming to our community, that population could increase faster than projected to 15,000 or over, raising our cost from 70% presently to 90% for RCMP. So I'm speaking against the elimination of this addition to our reserve.
Okay, we have a amendment on the floor. All in favor of the amended motion? Opposed? So the motion of the amendment is defeated. We'll now go to the main motion. Any further discussion before I call?
Hey, hold on, I gotta make sure, if I'm voting, so we're talking about eliminating it, so if I don't want to eliminate it, I'm voting no. Okay.
Clear? Okay, all in favor of the motion? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Isaacs.
I will move to include item 10.
Second that.
So this is about canceling the cultural master plan project. I really love and support the idea of a cultural master plan project. I want one in our community, and I am looking at things to cut that are that have the least impact on people, and this is one of those items, unfortunately. And so if there's an opportunity in the future to bring this back, if it's part of the OCP process, etc., I'm open to it. But in terms of things that we can do this year to that are not fundamental to the experiences of people in our community, this unfortunately is one of the things that I think could be included. Thank you.
Any further discussion before I call the vote? All in favor of the motion? Opposed? We have motion passes with one opposed. Clearly.
I would move we increase recreation fees by 16%. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it. It's item number 8.
Clearly.
Thank you, Your Worship. So currently our recreation center is paid mainly, like the operational costs are paid mainly through taxation. We do get some revenue through fees, but the fees are not generating enough revenue to help very much with the costs at the recreation center. And by raising the fees, we do put more onus on the users to help pay for that facility and provide some relief to taxation. I do know that some of those users are young and maybe low income, but I think there is a program for people getting passes at the rec center who fit into those categories. And if it isn't sufficient, I would suggest we expand that program to cover people with low incomes and have the fees for most other users be increased to address the idea that users should pay more costs than what they're doing right now.
Any further discussion on this? Councillor Almeida and then Councillor.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question for staff, probably for Director Bretzlaff. I was just curious with the increase, does that cover all the day pass, monthly passes and such, or does that include groups that rent the ice, rent the pool and meeting rooms as well?
Through the chair, Director Bretzlaff, if you could run through the list of everything it covers, that'd be brilliant. Thanks.
Through the chair to Councillor Almeida. Yes, the list would be quite inclusive of all our fees and charges across all our fees and charges bylaws. This includes, I'll go through the list, our campsite charges, our parks use charges, any facility rental, including ice or pool. It does include all our passes. It includes admissions. It includes our programs. It includes Dwight Hall, meeting rooms, theater rental. I believe that's the inclusive list. If I have missed anything, it's just because I didn't read it properly, but it's inclusive of all of our fees and charges.
Okay. Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you, Your Worship. So when I was reading this originally, I was thinking, maybe 10% of an increase is too high, maybe do 5% instead. But then I heard that the numbers in terms of the tax reduction actually is based on the 16%. And so I appreciate Councillor, well, actually, let me just back up and make an amendment motion to change 16 to 10.
Second that.
16 is a lot to swallow, even 10 is, but I appreciate the Councillor Elliott's balance of acknowledging that it is largely taxpayer funded, the recreation facilities in our community, not a large percentage is generated through user fees. And so putting a bit of the burden on the users of the facilities, I think is a balance. It's not ideal, but it's something. But so anyways, my amendment would just reduce it a bit to take a bit of the bite out of the increase.
A question to our CAO. What has been the annual increase for the last 3 years?
Through the chair, if I could pass that over to Ms. Denniston and also point out that the amendment equates to a 0.3% decrease. Thanks.
Through the chair, I will call on Mr. Bretzlaff. I do recall increases being brought forward a couple of years ago by Ms. O'Donnell, but I would like Mr. Bretzlaff to add any information that he has.
Your Worship, the annual increase has been roughly 3% for the last 3 years, year by year. And we are in the process of updating our bylaws anyways with respect to inflation and similar costs in other facilities. That work that's being done in the background saw increases of approximately 2%, maybe a little bit higher, in line with the 3% increase annually over the last 3 years.
So just to follow up, if there was a 16% increase this year, then looking at the last 4 years, would the average increase per year be close to the consumer price index?
Through the chair, I'm not sure we have the exact calculation, but I'll see if Ms. Denniston has a way forward on this one.
Through the chair, I would need some time to calculate the exact numbers, but my instincts, given the inflation that we've seen over the past 5 years, is that like 3% was lower than the CPI.
Thank you. Councillor Pong.
Thank you, Worship, through the chair. Just want to clarify, my booklet references a 10% increase, not a 16%. So where did the 16 come from?
Through the chair, during my presentation, Councillor Palm, I noted that an error was made in the report, and though it referenced 10% increase, the actual numbers presented were 16%. So I apologize for that.
So just to follow that up, Your Worship, I'm opposed to this increase because one of our major objectives in our community is to keep our population healthy. And that's what the recreation complex is there for. Not only healthy body physically, but mentally as well. If council was to look at this and say you're trying to reduce taxes to 5%, I'm totally opposed to a 10% double-digit increase. I could barely live with a 5%, but I could live with it based on past increases. But 16 or 10%, I'm opposed. Thank you.
So we have an amendment on the floor. See no further discussion.
Want to make sure I know what it is. I think I'd like to speak to him, but it's to change it from 16%, which isn't in the report, to 10%, which is. And I would like to speak on it. And
go ahead.
I've looked at this over and over again, wondering about who it's going to affect. I'm looking at all of the children who use the pool, the arenas for minor hockey, for all the different things that go on in that building, and who's going to be most negatively affected by it. And it's not people like me who pay the taxes and want to pay less. It's the young people in our neighborhood and in our community. Is a 10% increase going to be affordable for them? I'm glad we're discussing this now, and it's not on our final budget proposal, because I'd expected to see a lot more people interested and show up to talk about what we were going to spend money on and what we were not going to spend money on tonight. But I'm assuming we'll hear a lot from people next time we get together about the effect that a 10% increase in fees is going to mean to all the people who put on events and do things for children and young adults in our community, because I think we have to think about that when we're thinking about the money too. So I'm kind of divided on which way to go on this one, but right now I'm leaning towards not supporting it.
Okay, we have, yes, Councillor Isaacson.
I'm just listening to Councillor Doubt and Councillor Palm, both of their hesitations of which way they're going to go and interested in maybe 5%. I think this is also one of the hardest ones for me because of who might be impacted by the changes. And so I'm kind of in my head going all over the place right now, and we're voting on the amendment. I support it dropping. I would be open to it dropping even further if it passes. Thank you.
Through our CAO, the staff have any information that would suggest, with regard to the population, the percentage that they feel might be impacted by this increase?
Through the chair, if I might direct that to Director Bratzlaff, and I think what might also be of use to you is to have a sense of what the level of subsidies that are provided through different mechanisms. And before I hand over to him, I just thank you for understanding that options for onwards are just options. And it's about council setting the service levels and priorities you want, and we respond accordingly. So Director Bratzlaff, over to you.
Through the chair, thank you. As you may know, we're trying to answer questions ahead of time in back and forth online as well. I was trying to answer one of the questions that our CAO had, and I missed that question. I apologize. Could you please repeat the question?
Okay. Through the chair, Director Bratzlaff. So in addition to the question I asked you about the number of subsidized passes we give, the question from the mayor is, do we know what percentage of the population might be impacted by the proposed changes? Your worship, did I capture that correctly?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would not be able to answer the question of what population would be affected, percent of population. The way we keep our stats does not track individuals, so we would not have that number. We just have the gross numbers. As far as the subsidization, the way our subsidized processes currently work, we would need to alter that in order to satisfy what I think I'm hearing the concerns are. Our subsidy processes right now are generally focused on providing 52 passes for those that surpass that subsidization requirement. We currently don't have a subsidy program that gives a percentage discount across the board for programs.
Thank you. Councillor Early.
Thank you. I just wanted to speak to, I share the concerns about who is impacted, and I think we can address better targeted subsidy programs for those that need it, and maybe expand those programs to address some of those concerns. The grants in kind, which is item 7, I was not in favor of, is where we have the opportunity to allow people to use our facilities as a grant in kind and not charge them for those fees. And that program is a lot easier to target to those that benefit the community most. And for example, we do a grant in kind for the figure skating club for part of their ice time, or we could, target to the users that we think need those, and still maintain an appropriate level of user fees that help alleviate some of the operating costs from the tax-paying base. And so I think currently we don't necessarily have the best balance of getting users to pay their fair share. And it's particularly evident when we have users from outside of our areas too coming to use our facilities, and they don't necessarily have any other way to contribute other than the user fees, particularly campgrounds and things like that. I do want our community to be friendly and on par with other communities, but we've been holding our increases low and in some years to nothing back in our previous council. And so we have some catch up to do in that regard. So my preference would be to increase our fees and then perhaps bring in subsidy programs to alleviate the stress that might be for some users.
Councillor Isaacson and then Councillor Pong.
Thank you, Mayor. Through the mayor to staff, I'm wondering, it sounds like you're preparing new bylaws and you're doing things like researching comparable communities and looking at inflation and the actual costs. I'm wondering if we passed a motion, or if we passed this motion, would that direct you to increase each of those fees by 10%? Or like, I'm wondering if we are looking at increasing the overall fee revenue package by 10%, and that based on, as you're preparing the updated bylaws, there may be some that make sense to increase more rather than others, given comparable communities and fees. And so I'm wondering what the wiggle room is, and whether it makes sense to have an overall package, an overall fee, like revenue percentage increase, rather than on a item by item basis. I'm not sure if my question's clear, but I'm wondering whether financial staff, through the chair, or rec staff could respond to that suggestion.
Thank you for that, Director Bratzlaff. I think it's a question between you and the CFO of what's feasible. And I guess my question is to sum up what Councillor Isaacson is asking, is it possible to bring forward what would be an average decrease, but split differently across the different categories? So there might be a lower percentage for admissions, but perhaps higher for campground fees and things like that, presented to council as options. Councillor Isaacson, does that capture where you were going?
Yeah, for the most part. When you look at comparable communities, for example, there may be some where we're more out of whack and it makes more sense to increase them more dramatically. So yeah, the overall, so I didn't mean the average of 10%, but the overall fee increase hits that 10%, but might be divided up differently.
Okay. Director Bratzlaff, if I could have your input, thank you.
Sure. Through the chair, this would actually be quite good timing or something like that, based on where we're at in the process from a staff capacity perspective. We could merge those two ideas, and I think that's possible to bring you something. One thing that would be helpful in order for us to bring you something that is workable. Most of our current bylaws expire on March 31st of this year. We would prefer to be starting the next set on June 1st, and we would just request an extension of our current bylaw rates until June 1st, and then we could look at if we could get you this information on time.
So I'm going to ask council, is there a consensus, given the discussions taking place, that we defer this until our next final budget discussion?
Deferring helps. Yeah.
Okay. We have an amendment to the motion. Would like to continue discussing. Councillor Duck.
It was an interesting discussion between staff and Councillor Isaacson. I would prefer us to make a decision on the budget for next year about what we want to do. We've got a motion to increase recreation program fees by 10%. Higher than I'd like it to see, but there it is. I would like to know, when we're done talking about it, what our decision is. I would prefer not to put it off until, say, March 20th, which is much, much closer to the day all the bylaws that the Director of
Councillor
Parks and
Dowd,
Recreation.
we've agreed there's an amendment motion on the floor that we're going to vote on. So are you expressing whether or not you're in favor or not in favor?
And that's what I'm doing, Mr. Mayor. I'll just go. Because of the uncertainty and what it is, I'm going to vote no to the motion on the floor because I would like certainty on what's going to happen, and I'm not hearing it.
Councillor Armida.
Thank you, Mayor. During the discussion, I had a chance to look at what our current day use rates are and pass rates, and found, I think, what was maybe a previous bylaw that was done in 2021. There could have been a recent one there, a more recent one as well. So in summary, I like Councillor Isaacson's idea of not being 10% across the board, but a blended rate. So just as a comparison, from 4 years ago till today, the child rate as a drop-in at the center, the complex rather, has only gone up 10 cents, which is about 2.7%, whereas the adult rate has gone up 70 cents, about 12%. So there's been already some not consistent, just a proportional increase based on income. So I would actually be in favor of, letting this go and not doing anything to it right now, and then let Director Bretsoff come back with a revised plan in a few months that won't help us in 2025, but it'll help us for future years.
So we have an amendment to the motion. Voting, or are you commenting?
Just commenting to clarify. So I had brought up the idea of a 10% across the board. The amendment on the floor right now is to change it from 16 to 10. So there was a bit of side conversation, but the focus is back with the the original motion and 16 to 10. Okay.
All right. All in favor of the?
I got that hand up previously in your.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Pong.
Just like to say, these are the recommendations of that are optional. There are many places that we say these aren't written in stone.
Councillor Palm, you need to speak into the microphone.
I'm going to say, sorry, that I will be voting against this because there are so many other options available to us. At this point, we don't have to live and die on the sword on this.
Okay, we have an amendment motion. I'm calling all in favor. Opposed. So the motion passes 5-2. The amended motion passes 5-2. We'll now move to the main motion.
Your Worship.
Is that the amendment we just voted on, or was?
Yes.
Yes.
I think we'd have to vote again on the main motion, wouldn't we?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Your Worship. Just before we get to that, I did like the idea of another small amendment being increase recreation fees revenues by 10%, allowing flexibility as to where those increases might be different.
Another amendment. Do we have a seconder for the amendment? Councillor Isaacson has seconded the amendment. Any further discussion on the amendment, which is now appearing in front of us? Great. All in favor of the amendment? Oh. Councillor Isaacson.
So to speak to this, this gives staff a little bit of flexibility if they, it sounds like some work is already being done in terms of exploring the fees and what increases make sense given costs in other municipalities. And so by adding revenues, we are still providing clarity to the budgeting process that we are looking at a 10% revenue increase, but it allows staff flexibility on not necessarily applying 10% across the board. There might be some items where it makes more sense to increase it by 15 and others where it makes sense to increase it by 5.
Great. Councillor.
Sorry, Your Worship. So this now seems quite confusing to me. Just adding revenues after fees doesn't make, I mean, I understand what Councillor Isaacson pointed out, but the wording doesn't mean that when I read it. Anybody could explain that to me?
I could
think
speak to it.
Is that the total fees collected will increase by 10%. The staff has the ability to increase this by 13 cents, and equivalent over here by 27 cents. The total amount saved would be a decrease of 10%.
Perhaps instead of adding revenues after fees, what it means is increasing revenues from recreation fees. Does that mean more to you, or is that still?
That would be clear.
That would be clearer? Okay.
I'm okay with that friendly amendment. It means the same thing to me.
Okay, we'll just get this up.
So replace recreation fees with revenues. Oh, no. Add revenues from yeah. Revenues from, yeah.
Okay, we have an amendment. All in favor? Opposed? We have a motion passes with one opposed. We'll now move to the main motion. All in favor of the main motion as amended? Opposed? Have the motion passes with two opposed. At this point, we have been here since about 3:15. I'm going to call a 10-minute rest period.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. We'd start again. Councillor Elliott.
I move to use the BC Transit COVID Restart Grant to offset the BCT bill for a 0.5% decrease.
Seconded by Councillor Southcott.
That's number 9.
Any discussion on the motion?
Point of privilege. I'm distracted by the chatter, so if I could ask the audience to keep the chatter down.
Okay. Any discussion on the motion? Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. So I know this is a question through the chair to staff. I know that the bus shelters have, I think, my understanding is the bus shelters have accessed this at the mall, and I'm wondering if there are other examples of how this has been used in the past. I generally don't want to dip into savings to offset tax increases, but when we heard about this restart funding, or maybe it's not. I'm not sure what this funding is for.
Through the chair, this funding is only for operational.
Okay.
So we did initially request that we could use this funding for the bus shelters, which would have been great because it is a one-time purchase, and they said that they could not accommodate that this money is simply for operational.
Do you have another question?
So this is a grant that's for operational. When would it be used, like other than for exactly this purpose? Councillor Elliott seems to have an answer.
Yeah.
So the original purpose of the BC COVID Restart Grant was during COVID when people's ridership was way down and they were still trying to provide transit. It was to try to offset the lack of revenue from transit from COVID so that we could keep buses running. And so our ridership is back up, and so we won't need it to do that anymore. And I probably should have spoke to the motion at the front end so that we would understand. And so using the remainder of the grant when we no longer have any risk of that happening, or it doesn't appear that we do, is a good use of the money.
Any further questions?
So then to clarify, the current 5-year financial plan uses this money over 5 years and spreads out increases over 5 years?
Through the chair, the plan doesn't have it budgeted to be used. Okay. Staff were hoping that it could be used for a project, and now it's become very obvious that that's not possible. I will say that council have made 2 previous motions through tips to increase the BC Transit cost, I believe in 2026. So if it was used in 2026, in theory, you would have more of a gradual increase to the BC Transit contributions.
So knowing that, I don't support this motion because I think it would make sense to use it next year when we have that increase based on the direction that we've given to BC Transit and staff to make improvements to services next year. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion? Opposed? Motion's passed.
I have a motion to make.
Councillor Elliott.
I would move that the committee or I guess that for number 12, I want to change the 20% cap to, or the 10%, limited to 10% of the yearly dividend up to 40% of the yearly dividend. And if I get a seconder, I will explain why I want to do that. So in conversations that I've had with members of the Community Forest Board, the trending percentage used for nonprofits from the community forest has been around 40% and 60% for the city. And while I understand that this is going to increase the budget and not lower it, it does maintain our commitment to our nonprofit societies at about 40% of the dividend. And I think that some of the situations we find ourselves in would be improved by putting that money out into nonprofits and supporting our nonprofits to help them with perhaps creating housing or some of the social needs that are in our city. And so I feel like that I'd like to support that. Thanks.
A question through the chair to Councillor Elliott. Do you also mean to remove the maximum, or is the intention to keep the maximum that's there currently? You mentioned changing to 10% to 40%.
Yep. So I do not want to have that maximum because it's quite a bit less than what the application stream has been. There are some major projects coming up in the community that do need support from the community forest, and I don't want to preclude that support going to those nonprofits, including the Foundry. So I want to stick with closer to traditionally, we've been doing 40% for nonprofits and 60% for the city, and I'm moving that we continue to do that.
So then, through the chair, you've answered my question, but your motion was to change 10% to 40%, and so
Yep.
It sounds like your motion actually is more than that.
40% of the Powell River Community Forest yearly dividend with no maximum.
So Councillor Palm.
Yes, just to clarify, then you are asking Councillor Elliott to retain basically the status quo of the contribution to nonprofits through our community forest. I don't even know if we need to visit this item if we want the status quo to continue. So I don't know if there's a need to do this. So that's my question.
Councillor Doat.
Complicated question. What are we going to do? But a really important one to the community, I think. So I don't see this as a status quo motion. I want to be clear that grants to nonprofit organizations come from part of the reserve that is forwarded to the city by the community forest. It's a decision by the community forest jointly with council about how much that money is. And then the distribution of the funds is a decision that's also made in collaboration between the community forest. And just so we know what we're talking about, and I wanted numbers that I could rely on and find in black and white, I've got the community forest grant awards for 2023 from the most accurate annual report that the city gets, which was 2023. 2024 will be coming out soon. But the total community projects in 2023, and I'm not going to list them all, for nonprofits were 1.169,129,000. That's a long way away from 250,000. The city projects were an additional $2,860,000 for a total from the community forest of $4,029,129. That makes a significant difference to our community. You can go and look at the annual report, and you can see all of the nonprofit societies that applied for or were considered and given grants in those years. And it's the lifeblood of this community. I think if we want to cut that off to 250,000 or less than that, I think we're doing a disservice to the community. So I'm going to vote against this motion, and I would prefer to leave it the way it is and have the city work with the community forest in finding a different way to use those monies.
So Elliott.
So currently our draft budget does not have any allocation for nonprofits. And so if we do not put something in the budget about the nonprofits, we don't have anything in the budget. So our staff needs some direction around what it is council would like to see in that regard. The proposal in here is to increase the amount to nonprofits to 10% to a maximum of 250. Through my investigations and meeting with folks over on the board, learned that our traditional amount is closer to 40% for nonprofits and 60% for the city. So I would like to put ourselves closer to what we have traditionally been doing, even though we have not traditionally set that in our budget. I think it's incumbent on us to do that because the revenue side is in the budget without any allocation for nonprofits at this point in time. And so we need to figure that out and decide what it is we want to do.
Your worship, I do support this. I have very much appreciated the social benefits of the Paul Community Forests grants over many years. I support this for now. I may not support the principle of this for a long time, and I'm really hoping, Mayor, that your forecasts of greater revenues into our city are true. But I think for the moment, with the fiscal situation the way it is, we need to be extra cautious and just put a rein on the development activities that the community forest has so magnificently supported for many years. But they really are development. And the principle has been that organizations that have received the grant money then go on to support themselves, which has been the case due to the very fine work of the Community Forest Board. So I can't support this amendment for the moment. And I do support the original motion for now. Thank you.
Councillor Isaacson.
Thank you. A question for staff. So the motion that we made on December 17th, so if I back up to, so not a question for staff yet, back up to what happened. When staff presented draft number 1, they made some assumptions, and one of those assumptions, or one of the assumptions built into the draft financial plan was that $2 million per year would be used from revenues and dividends from the community forest to pay for rec center improvements. And the question that staff asked us was, if you don't want that, if you want a certain amount to go to nonprofits, then let us know how much you want to go to nonprofits. And so at that meeting, we passed the motion to have that maximum be $250,000. And I believe it was Councillor Almeida added that amendment about the 10% of yearly dividends to a maximum of $250,000. And so right now in our budget, it's based on providing $250,000 per year to community organizations, up to a maximum. And so if we want to go to status quo, so for example, in a year of donating $1.3 million, 1.363, for example, dollars to community organizations, that means that we are increasing the taxes from the current draft up 5% again. And so status quo and going back to the way we have done things will mean that we are going back up in tax dollars by our tax increase by 5% over whatever else we've agreed to today. And so in the discussion that we had on December 17th, I believe that, or one of my reasons for supporting it is appreciating the work that the community forest has done over the years. They do amazing work in understanding nonprofit organizations and adding really important capital improvements through nonprofits to our organizations. But so much of that money was built on times where our community was much more flush because of revenue from the mill site. And I think we are in different times now, and we need to shift our thinking a little bit. And I think that how we end up, hopefully, will be in conversation with the community forest. And I know that Councillor Elliott has a notice of motion to put together a working group with the community forest to make recommendations to council on how we might change the nature of our relationship and how money is granted, et cetera, et cetera. We're not there yet. And so the question is, what are we doing this year with taxes? And this is a very hard one for me. But looking at the amendment that Councillor Elliott has proposed, which kind of gets us kind of back to status quo-ish, but in a maybe worded a bit more explicitly, is not the change that I want to see, and I'm more in line with the motion that we originally passed. I think the change that I might want to see is that the 10% of yearly dividends was maybe based on a 3-year rolling average, and so numbers didn't go up and down so dramatically, because some years we've granted a lot, and some years some years the dividend has been a lot, and sometimes it's been a little. But this is one of those really hard conversations that would be better in discussion with the Community Forest Board, but high-level direction from council needs to be provided. And so I support a version of the original motion that we passed on December 17th, and don't support this one because it could result in a 5% increase from what we currently have on the table in terms of tax increases.
Councillor Doat.
Oh, I'm trying, my recollection, and Councillor Isaacson just brought it up to me, is that when we talked about this item and item number 4 on the list in December, it was all combined in one motion. And we're now trying to deal with them separately and extrapolate the impact of them individually and differently. And I don't think we have those numbers from staff and exactly what they mean. I still look at it, and I look at what we were going to provide to nonprofit, or what we did provide to nonprofits in 2023, and what we would plan to provide in 2025. And I'm not in favor of doing it. I think we need to work out a better answer.
Not in supporting of the amendment. I think that the priorities are for us to have a reasonable tax base which has multiple impacts on a variety of different activities in the city. And so I'm going to vote against this and prefer to go back to the 10%. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you. So when we made that last motion, it was my thinking that we could see what that looked like and have the chance to actually make a decision today. My thinking about setting it at 40%, it's closer in the neighborhood of what we have been doing and where the community's been at. The changes that we hope to talk to the community forest about with our committee and come back with recommendations would be better served relationship-wise to be not making huge changes from what they're used to until we've had a chance to talk about that and move in those directions in a more collaborative way. So this gets us closer to what we used to do as far as amounts go, but we didn't used to set out those amounts. And so this is progress that we are structuring in our budget, a way to set that out and be clear up front about what we're doing. And we want to move to that. I do think dividends should be based on rolling averages as well, because there's too many peaks and valleys in the forest industry to not worry about that. But that's part of our conversation to be had between now and next year. I think we want our community and our community forest board to feel confident that they're going to have a conversation with us before any major changes happen. And so this gets us closer to doing it that way.
Your Worship, I am very happy to see Councillor Elliott's mindset and trying to maintain the status quo, which has served this community so well over the past 16 years that our community forest has been coming forward and helping us rebuild this community. I don't like the idea. I certainly didn't like the idea of the previous motion that council passed with no dialogue with the community forest. I think it was very disrespectful and should have never been done. And this is just another example where you're passing a motion without any dialogue. So I would like to vote against this and rescind the previous motion so that we can start fresh with our community forest and build a healthy relationship with them for our community. That is the way we should be approaching such fine community members and board members of our community forest. Thank you.
I just want to point out, Councillor Palm, that in your absence, we have had a number of meetings with the Powell River Community Forest Board. Any additional comments before we make the motion?
I have a question.
Yes.
Through the mayor to staff. So the numbers here are based on an anticipated dividend of $600,000. I know that sometimes it takes a while for the community forest to make decisions around their dividend. Is that number still accurate from when this report was released?
Through the chair, it is still an estimate. I'm anticipating to hear on Monday what the final dividend will be between Monday and Friday. So it is subject to change.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Yes, Councillor Elliott.
So through the mayor to the staff, if we don't make any motions tonight about the budget and the community forest grants, what is the status of nonprofit grants in our budget?
Through the chair, it's zero until council gives the direction, because it's a fully discretionary item for council to decide on.
So my point to council tonight is it's set up that way right now that we have zero in the budget. And so if we don't choose something, then we don't have any room in our budget for doing grants from the community forests. And so to Councillor Palm, doing nothing will get you zero, and that's a big depart from status quo. So we have to make a choice.
I just have to clarify, the last 16 years, it has not been zero.
That's not what our budget is doing right now.
Okay, we have a motion. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question. Are we not, in our budget, we do still have the grants in aid, do we not? And grants in kind. And those are essentially to nonprofits.
Through the chair, that's correct. There's about $500,000 in grants in aid, grants in kind, and contribution agreements, and then about $560,000 in permissive tax exemptions.
So may, that's a fair bid. That's a fair contribution to nonprofits in this community that needs looking at itself.
Has nothing to do with
Talked about that.
the, sorry.
Okay, we have an amendment. Any further?
Just a main motion, I believe, Your Worship.
With regard to the main motion, I'm going to call it.
The amendment?
There's no amendment.
I understand from Councillor Elliott that this is the main motion that she put forward and not an amendment. And so I'm going to call the question on this motion. All in favor? Opposed? Motion is defeated. Now. Yes.
I'll move the original number 12.
Okay. And you wish to further discussion?
No, thank you. I think I made my defense of that in my last comment prior to the last one.
Okay, Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. 10% and $250,000 is too low. It's a departure from what we have been doing in the past that is extreme, and it will create hardship for a lot of our nonprofits during a time when they also need some certainty. We have a foundry that is going to be looking to our community forest for support, and we're capping this contribution for all nonprofits cumulatively from the community forest at $250,000. I'm not in favor. I think absolutely not. And the amount of funds that are leveraged from grants through all of the community forest applications to nonprofits pretty much even doubles what we put out there for these grants. And for example, if the community forest were to grant the foundry the entire $250,000, the foundry would then be able to probably leverage a bunch of grants and turn it into $5 million, which is what they need to do. Perhaps they might need slightly more, and I think this precludes that. And it's not something I'm prepared to support.
My comment is very simple. We're going through a very challenging financial position in the city. Mills shut down, hoping to rebuild the economy, but in the interim, I support motion based on the recommendation from council of 10%. Councillor Isaacs.
I'd like to move an amendment to add 3-year rolling average in between like 10% of the 3-year rolling average of PRCF's yearly dividends.
Seconded by Councillor Southcott. Councillor Note.
Yeah. Take a risk here. I'm only going to try to speak on this once, so I'm going to try to speak on the whole thing. And first off, I think there is a solution. And if this motion is defeated, I don't want to leave it with nothing being done. And I'm been thinking about a motion that would find a way with the Community Forest Board to collaboratively come up with a meaningful solution to how the 2025 grants from the community forest could be handled. I think it could be done in a better way than this resolution. That's why I'm going to vote against this one. I have an alternative to propose if we get there.
Any further discussion on the motion that is on the floor? Councillor Isaac.
Yeah. I will, well, so there's an amendment on the floor right now. Is there not, or was it seconded?
No, this is a new motion.
I just
Through the chair, if you could let Ms. Walls catch up. So Ms. Walls, what you're doing is you're adding a 3-year rolling average after the 10%.
So it's 10% of a 3-year rolling average?
After 10%, yeah. So my understanding is I moved that and Councillor seconded it? Okay. And so my rationale for making this amendment is to avoid big peaks and valleys and make things a little bit more consistent in what we offer through the community forest to nonprofit organizations.
Do we have an amendment? Any further discussion on the amendment before I call the? Great. All in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Passed with one opposed. We'll now go. Yes.
I would propose to amend it by striking out the maximum of 250,000 per year.
Not see a second.
I'm thinking. Second.
Okay.
I have a question then. A question through the mayor to staff. Off the top of your head, do you have a sense of the dividends of the past 3 years and what that would end up being? 10% of the past 3 years?
Through the chair, I recall last year was about 6 million. And I would have to look up the prior year. 2 million rings a bell, though. I would need some time to confirm those numbers, but.
Okay, any further comments on the amendment? Right, all in favor of the amendment? Opposed? Sure that.
You can call it again if you like.
Sorry?
You can call again if we want to recount.
Yeah, if we could call again. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed to the amendment? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, we now move to the main motion. Which is on the screen in front of us. Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm very curious what alternative motion Councillor Dowd would make if we didn't pass this. And to support this, I would need to know what Councillor Dowd has on his mind.
In response, there will only be an alternative motion if this one is defeated. So either you're in favor of this motion or you're not. I'm telling you, I have an alternative motion to propose. I'll do that if this one is defeated. If it passes, there won't be any need for an alternative.
Okay. The amended motion in front of us. All in favor of the amended motion? Opposed? Okay, the motion passes. Okay, next item. Councillor Isaacson.
I move item 11, eliminate vacant social planner position and project.
By Councillor Almeida. Any discussion before we move the motion?
I'll just speak to why I made the motion. This position has been vacant for, I believe, about 2.5 years. The city has moved to hire a manager of city development to focus on things, a number of things, including affordable housing, which I believe is as indicated in our strategic priorities, one of the main priorities of this council. And so there's also the social cohesion project that's been on the books for a couple of years. It's undefined, and given staff capacity, I don't think will be acted on. And so eliminating this puts the focus on the city development person who, again, one of their priorities will be on affordable housing. Thank you.
Other comment before I call the motion? Other doubt?
Do we have that additional planner in the planning department, or is that a potential? And are these $80,000 in savings actually available this year, or would they come some other time?
Through the chair, we're currently going through the process of, this is currently vacant, if that's your question, this position. Or was your question about the city development manager role?
Is there somebody in the role right now?
No, there's nobody in the social planner position right now. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship. For item 13, I would move that we transfer $400,000 to the Property Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund to help mitigate large property tax increases. If I get a seconder, I'll speak to it. Thank you, Your Worship. So we have not been making enough reductions in the budget, and $200,000 helps mitigate those things that we did not approve. And I think that it also adds to the reserve that we've already put there by the amount I said. So I don't know what I don't know. I was going to give you the total, but I'm not now because I can't. I have a headache. But I'd like to add to that reserve, but not add 600,000. I'd prefer to add the smaller number.
Screen so that
I think I said 400,000.
any question, Sir Isaacson.
Thank you, Chair. So this motion was discussed January 14th, and at that time we had a really robust debate about what number to choose, whether to do 600,000, 300,000, or nothing. And that conversation resulted in a vote of 600,000, and I'd like to stay with that, so I don't support this motion. When we were shown the graph by staff of what the implications for the decisions are, transferring less than 600,000 resulted in a much steeper increase next year. And again, I'm all for stabilizing things over time. And so I would prefer to keep it at the original $600,000 and not pass this motion and pass the original.
Councillor Doat.
It's interesting going through this process because, logically it seems to make tax smoothing a logical thing to do, right? We're not being asked to smooth taxes. We're being asked to decrease taxation and decrease the increases from year to year in taxation. So I'm not in favor of reducing the tax we're going to start collecting from people to 400,000 from 600,000. I would rather just not collect that increased tax this year in hoping to reduce taxes next year. Why don't we just pay as we go? There's no point in my mind of increasing taxes by $600,000 this year just to pay them next year. Doesn't make sense.
Slip on.
Yes, Your Worship, through the Chair, I concur with Councillor Dout's comments. And like I said previously, There's all kinds of other places we can look to reduce costs.
Any further questions, discussions before we move the motion? Councillor Southcott.
Thank you, Richard. I don't support this. I do support the 600,000, as painful as that is, because we have no guarantee of continued revenues. This would go into a reserve, so it would be money we would keep added to money that we got last year and hopefully are going to receive this year. We're going to still be here hopefully next year, and I definitely am in favor of smoothing out the pain, partly because it is really clear to me tonight, but it's been clear to me for a lot of years how much trouble we have actually cutting back on all of what we receive because we are collecting taxes. I don't expect that to end. So I am all for putting 600,000 into savings and not 400. Thanks.
I just concur with what Councillor Southcott said. I would support 600,000. Any further discussion, questions before we call the motion on this? All in favor of this motion? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Isaacs.
I'll make the original motion to add item 13, transfer to the Property Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund. And if it needs clarity, I can add that $600,000.
Councillor Southcott.
And so the intention is based on our original decision in January when we had a really robust report from staff, and at that time decided to support 600,000. I would like to continue with that. This means that if there is a large decrease in revenue from the mill site in subsequent years, we're able to draw from that to make the that financial hit more smooth to our community members.
Additional comments before I call the question? All in favor? Opposed? The motion passes. What do we have left? I'm asking the CAO.
We haven't taken a look at 4 and 7.
Here to address items 4 or 7.
I have a I don't know if it's a comment or question yet. For item number 4, I'm interested in amendments to the reserve fund bylaw, but I don't want to presuppose what those amendments are. I do want to support the notice of motion that Councillor Elliott made previously that will come up at a future council agenda to develop a small working group to be in conversation between council and the community forest so that we can make some updates and address the financial reality of our community and how it's drastically different than it was 10, 15 years ago. And so I think that this, as it's written, presupposes what that outcome would be. And I don't want to do that, but I want to note that I want the working group to address this. And so given that interest, I'm not sure what the appropriate motion to make would be, whether to defer this discussion till after or to, because that working group doesn't exist yet, I can't refer this motion to a working group. And so I'm looking to other members of council or to staff on what motions might be suitable if you agree with me and are interested in making something similar.
Just for clarification, is it mandatory that we have a motion on each of these recommendations put forward by staff tonight?
Through the chair, and I'll ask Mr. Fleming and Ms. Denniston to correct me if I'm wrong. If you don't make the motion, it doesn't get included.
But it's also, add to that, it's not mandatory you make a recommendation today, just adding on to what the CAO said.
Thank you. Councillor Elliott.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Councillor Isaacson. So I think that we are better off to not make a motion, and if we're already aware that there's a notice of motion, to try diplomatic channels and setting up that structure. When we have the structure that we need, it would be more appropriate to make motions at that time and to just hold off for now.
Doug.
Well, I'm going to venture a motion. Maybe I can do it here instead of where I was going to do it otherwise. So, same issues are coming up in a number of places. So I am going to move that the city meet with the Powell River Community Forest Board, discuss the allocation of dividends and the division of the dividends for grants to the city and to nonprofits within the city, and come back with a recommendation to council by March 20th on a solution.
Second that.
Further discussion?
No, I'll explain what I'm getting to there. Okay. The idea is for the city and the Community Forest Board to sit down in a collaborative way and talk about the best use of those funds and how they can be divided. There are many city projects that I'd like to see go ahead that perhaps could go ahead if the money was there. And there are many nonprofits who have been telling me over the last year the applications that they intend to make to the community forest for those funds. And if we could collaborate and come up with a solution between both groups that they think is good, then we could make a decision. I think I heard staff saying that if we don't make some kind of decisions, there will be no grants to give. I don't want to see that. I don't recall ever setting the limits for community forest grants to nonprofits or the city in the budget procedure before, but maybe it's true. But I'd like to do the motion that I said there. Gives an opportunity to talk to the Community Forest Board and the city and come back with maybe a positive recommendation that can both fill the needs of the nonprofits, organizations, the city, the community forest, and everybody involved. So that's why I'm making the motion.
Motion that's been seconded. Councillor Pong.
Yeah, I concur with Councillor Dout's comments wholeheartedly. As adults in the room usually reach agreement through dialogue, communication. This is the proper process to proceed so that we can all get on the same page, not simply by passing a motion, raising our hand in this chamber, which has impact on that great organization that has helped this city so many years. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, so just so everybody understands the history, I was at the last board meeting of Community Forest. Following that meeting, I discussed with Councillor Elliott a motion putting forward to have a Councillor Elliott and myself interface with the chair and a board member from Community Forest so we could address these types of issues. So we have a motion. Any further discussion before we vote?
Through the chair, I just need council to be aware of some of the challenges that we have with timing for the required adoption by May 15th. If I can get the schedule, Mr. Carson, Just to show you the challenge with coming back by March 20th is by then we have to have the bylaw ready. And so right now on our schedule for March 20th, we have the first 3 readings.
Date you'd suggest?
Through the chair, staff will be implementing these changes next week, and the cutoff will be, so we have 5 days to implement the changes, produce the report, and 1 week of review of the report, and then the report is published for a week. So if we're proposing to bring the bylaw forward for 3 readings on March 20th, and the meeting doesn't happen until March 20th, it'll quite delay, and delays in the budgeting process impact the property tax discussions. We can't speak about property tax rates until we know what the property tax levy is. So it might require some additional special meetings, but it's quite tight. I'm not sure how it would all fit in. I will just add that based on the rolling 3-year average and the current estimated dividend, it would be a donation to nonprofits of $356,000 in 2025 is what the current budget would have based on the current motion that has been approved.
Councillor Elliott and Councillor Doudt.
Thank you, Your Worship. We do have a notice of motion for a small working group to talk to the Community Forest Board. President Greg Humpel has let us know he's out of community or away for the next few weeks, which is not going to meet your deadline. And so my suggestion would be that we bring forward that notice of motion to this meeting, because it now looks like we're trying to address that process through Councillor Doubt's proposed motion with a different process. And so we could try to meet as a huge group and do it in a timely fashion. I don't think it's possible. We could go with the motion that's currently been passed, initiate our working group, and when Mr. Hempel gets back from his trip, we could set up some conversations that could bring recommendations back to council that would be a little less cumbersome than having full meetings, which would have to be, they would likely not happen in a timely fashion given everybody's availability. So my preference would be to defeat this motion, bring forward our notice of motion from before, and kickstart that process.
Well, I'm looking at the schedule that we have before us in today's meeting. It talks about the February 27th meeting and financial plan draft 2. And the next time it would come forward for second and third reading, first, second, and third reading would be March 20th. That's the current schedule. So the motion asks for somehow the city and the Community Forest Board to get together and come back with a report before March 20th. And maybe they will have to print that report up on their way into the council meeting, and we'll have to share copies of it. But it confers the timeline that we're talking about. I would have liked to get this whole process started maybe a little earlier, so we wouldn't be bumping up on the deadline to get our tax notices. But I think what we need to do is make sure we get it right. I'd like to do this and actually engage with the community forest in a collaborative process. And it doesn't have to conflict with the motion that the mayor and Councillor Elliott have put forward as a notice of motion. It could be done cooperatively.
Okay, I just want to summarize. We have passed a motion based on a recommendation from staff. Now, we have another motion put forward which wants further communication and potentially give rise to a change in the motion that was passed today. Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you, Chair. Could we have the motion back up, please, staff? I think similar to Councillor Elliott, I would like to support the notice of the motion that was given under the notice of motion for the working group to hash things out and come to council with some suggestions. I feel like this is in conflict or makes it a little bit unclear or might duplicate efforts. And also, I don't think is feasible with March 20th. I think it's an important conversation to have, but given how Mr. Hemphill is out of community right now, I just don't think it's feasible. And we have clarity for the budget this year based on, or some clarity on the budget based on the motion that was just passed related to the dividends. And so it's a starting point. And I think my main reason for this is I see another solution that's already coming down the pike, and also timeline not realistic based on what staff shared. And I also want to reiterate the motion that we just passed. There was no staff recommendation. They kind of gave us a blank line when we had that original discussion, and it was council that passed the specifics, and council that also passed the specifics just now. And so staff have provided us with options and understanding the implications of those options, but it was very much a council decision on the allocation of dividends. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, on the motion that's in front of us, all in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Councillor Elliott.
If it pleases the council, I would like to deal with our notice of motion that we made in the past meeting here today, if that's okay. And that would be the motion that we made to create our small working group to work with the community forest.
Is it relevant to, the budget? I would prefer, unless there's a consensus on council, for that. Councillor Doubt.
I just want to comment on that. We approved the budget or an agenda at the beginning of the meeting. The motion that Councillor Elliott was talking about is not on the agenda. It wasn't ever intended to be on this agenda. I prefer to go ahead and deal with the business that we have in front of us.
All right. Any further motions from council? Councillor Isaacson.
Yes, with regards to number 7, I'd like to propose something different than what is suggested here. Rather than eliminate grants and aid in kind, I would like to decrease grants and aid / kind to NPOs by $100,000 annually.
So each of them, or?
The sum total.
Through the chair, just to clarify, presently we have a ceiling, I believe, for that those amounts for $400,000 annually.
No, so this is different. So the grants and aid in kind, this is like grants and aid, grants in kind, also contribution agreements. So for example, with the Music Academy and the museum, so all the different ways, but not including permissive tax exemptions where we do have that limit, and not including the community forest. All of the other ways that we provide support to nonprofits, that is what remains here, and it totals approximately $500,000 a year. When I say $100,000, like it would be prorated this year. That's my intention, but anyways, that's my motion.
Not seeing a seconder.
Okay.
I'm not seconding, but I do have a question of staff. Our grant in kind budget of $500,000, do we tend to hit that limit, or what's our average grant in kinds for actual expenditures been in the last few years?
Through the chair, the grant in kind budget is $50,000 and we tend to hit it. Grant in kind, the grant in aid is $25,000 and we tend to allocate all that money. And then the remaining is the contribution agreements.
Okay, I guess I misread this.
Any further?
Yeah, so moving out of this and into specific items, I'd like to cancel the complex entrance sign special project.
Do you have a number for that?
So in this is in the draft 1 of the 5-year financial plan when we had all of those items, and it's on page 61, and it's number 147.
Let's give staff a chance to pull that up.
Which document are we looking at?
So I'm looking at the draft 1 of the 5-year financial plan.
Oh, okay.
So that was December 17th, I believe.
It's not attached to our agenda. We have to go back.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's complex entrance sign is the name of the special project. Not a special project, it's the
Do we have a seconder? Second by Councillor Southcott.
So I, scanning for things that, again, don't impact direct services to our residences, and things that are lower priority and haven't been spent yet. And so the complex entrance sign, my understanding, it's been on the books a while. It's $110,000. I think it's the idea of having a much more visible, public-facing, and programmable recreation complex entrance sign is fantastic. But again, it's not something that directly impacts services to the public. And so I think it's an opportunity to get something.
Any further discussion? Motion? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes.
That one. So another one. The same document. Page 43. Well, I actually don't.
I'm going to take a rest and then come back.
I actually have it's related to page 43, item 57. The motion is to divest the Sports Hall of Fame and current associated reserves to a nonprofit society.
Wait, are you seconding or you're questioning?
I have a question.
Please.
So I think that's only practical if there's a nonprofit that's expressed an interest in running that. If there isn't, then it's not really a feasible thing to just throw in the budget with no implementation plan. So
we're getting into discussion with.
So the question, I guess.
Seconded motion.
Yeah, the question I had before I could second or contemplate that would be: is there any? Has that come forward because there is a nonprofit interested in that?
Through the chair, Director Brett Slapp, if you'd like to respond. Thank you.
Through the chair, I've not had any specific interest in that specifically. There's been some informal conversations about whether or not there would be a better structure, but no current nonprofit has come forward.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Our CFO.
Through the chair, to add to that, there were informal discussions with the committee, because it is the structure how it is now is the committee does disband and then come back together for the event. One of the feedbacks was that it was difficult for them to fundraise and get donations because the donations needed to be made out to the city of Powell River. Some discussions from our auditor that they would prefer it to be a nonprofit structure, so that all the expenses are run through the city and through the city's process. So it is, from a financial controls perspective and from a fundraising perspective, preferable to be a nonprofit, if the committee would want to consider that option.
Is there a seconder though, so I can speak to it?
Palm, are you seconding?
No, I'm not seconding it, Your Worship.
Second for discussion.
We have a seconder.
Thank you. So my reason for putting this forward, it was on the list of possibilities last year. And so that's where I drew this from. We transfer money for the gala every couple of years. And again, I'm looking for things that do not directly impact services to the community. I do think it's an important project of the community, and I know it's important to a lot of people, but in terms of allowing people to engage in recreation, I would rather focus on the recreation complex. And I think that for some of the reasons shared by the CFO, it would be a prudent example of something that we could cut that can still be supported by the community, can still be provided in-kind space by the city, and would again allow us to cut without the services that staff provide to the community. Thank you.
Councillor Palm and then Councillor Doat.
Yes, Your Worship, just a couple of comments. First of all, there are a considerable amount of funds in the Sport Hall of Fame Reserve presently, and transferring those funds to a community group I don't think is the wise move, because that event has been largely funded through organizations in support, donations, and not utilizing city funds in any great extent. So I don't want to see those funds disappear from the city coffers. And it would be the polite thing to do to ask the committee to weigh in on whether they want a private organization to run it or they want the committee to of volunteers to keep organizing it. That would be the polite thing to do. So this is not something we're doing or going to plan to do this term. That'll be a next term event. And I just can't support this without reaching out to all those great volunteers that put on the first two events for this community.
Councillor Doat.
And Councillor Palm just actually answered my question. Is according to what he's saying, there's no plan in this term, and I think that means up to 2026 to actually put on an event and use any of those funds. So, you know, it's an interesting motion to make. There's plenty of time to look at changing the procedure and see if we can find a nonprofit partner for the Sports Hall of Fame. And if we change it this year, even in the budget, it's not going to actually make any dollars difference. There is no project in attendance. So I think we should spend our time on better and more appropriate things that are actually going to end up maybe putting a nickel or a dime back in somebody's pocket.
Councillor Almeida.
Thank you, Mayor. Question to the CFO. Just switch pages, but I believe I saw that the contribution to the Sports Hall of Fame reserve is around 19,000 per year. Correct me if I'm wrong. Could we hold off on the contribution without having to make a decision on the committee and then discuss options with committee members and potential partners down the road?
Through the chair, just for background with the Sports Hall of Fame, the reserve policy is not that we transfer funds to that reserve. The reserve policy is that the event funds itself. And so staff don't plan transfers to the reserve because of that. In theory, there should be a profit from the event and that would build up the reserve. What we have seen is a loss from the event. So now the the reserve only has about 17,000. So it will be, I suppose, a part of the discussion with whatever group takes it on, because that is the remaining funds for the event. But traditionally, it would cost more than that.
So Isaac.
Yeah, just to add a little bit more clarity to my intention, I actually imagine that the committee could form a society and be that nonprofit itself. It wouldn't need to be divested to some other sorry, being dramatic here, another unknown entity, because I do think the Sports Hall of Fame committee is the one that knows that project the best. And if that group wanted to continue and take it on and form a society and have a bank account at the credit union, that would actually make the most sense to me to keep those people involved. Thank you.
PAO?
Through the chair, I'd like to turn over to staff because my understanding is that this committee is formed by council approximately every 2 years and currently doesn't exist officially, but I'd like staff to clarify if that's correct. So Ms. Walls, if you could speak to that, thank you.
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Sorry, missed what she said.
Through the chair, Ms. Walls confirmed that I'm correct in the understanding that the committee doesn't officially exist and council would appoint it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a question. Would this actually save any money in this budget if we were to do this year?
Through the chair, it wouldn't save money this year, but it would in the future when the event is to occur.
Yeah, Councillor.
Just a last comment to Councillor Isaacson's comments in terms of the committee. Yes, the polite thing to do would be to ask the committee what their wishes are. If they want to make a private organization and go forward, that would be the polite thing to do. Thank you, Your Worship.
Any further before I call the motion?
Yeah, well, just to
Councillor Elliott.
So it isn't going to impact our budget this year, and but I do think that somebody should work on trying to find out if this is possible this year. So I don't know if it's a budget motion more than it is sort of a direction to set up some kind of process to figure out whether this is possible or not. And I don't know. I know the motion would necessitate staff organizing some sort of way of figuring that out. I don't know what that looks like, and I'm a little uncomfortable with the motion not knowing what that looks like. As Councillor Palm has pointed out, there's people who are vested in this, and they don't currently have a committee that meets. So I'm not sure what the alternative would be. I would hate to see us advertising an opportunity for a nonprofit to take this over without having some other kind of conversational process. And so I don't want to pass the motion, but I do want to provide support for figuring out a process for looking into this.
Motion is defeated. Councillor Isaacs.
Thank you. Before I make this motion, I need to ask staff if it's even legal. I swear I saw this online that another community did it, but there might be provincial legislation that stops us. And that is stop paying interest on tax prepayments, installment prepayments. And so I see a head shake, so not legal. Okay.
Through the chair, the corporate officer would know more than I would, but I do believe that, and Mr. Fleming, please correct me if I'm wrong, I do believe that we are required to pay interest on tax prepayments.
That's my understanding as well, Your Worship.
Thank you.
Okay, any additional items? If not, I will move to item 6, which is public clarification.
8. We
I
call
think
it
we're
8.
at 8.
We got 8? Oh,
It is called
Same
public.
title,
yeah.
which is a coincidence.
It's got to get my eyeballs here. We're at 8, which is public clarification, which I think we used to immediately refer to Mr. Galinsky if he had any clarifications required.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm wondering if when the CFO would anticipate having the adjusted tax rate available from tonight's discussions.
Through the chair, we could provide you with a summary of the total of the results of tonight by email tomorrow. Is that what you're looking for? Or are you looking for when the bylaw will come forward?
No, the email offer would be wonderful. I thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, CFO, for that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please come forward. Introduce yourself.
My name's John Brownsell, and I have a question on the water discussion where you're increasing the rates at 4% per year. So that's about 13% over the 3 years, but you're entering into a long-term water contract with Tlalomin on their 30-unit housing project on the old hospital site. Has anybody looked into the rate that's being charged to them? And does it include these rate increases every year? Are they locked into a 5 or 10-year term at a lower rate?
Ask our CFO.
Okay, through the chair, I believe what the speaker is talking to is a development on private land within the city, regardless of ownership. So they would pay the same rates and fees that everybody else would. Thank you.
We also pay property taxes, which cover other expenses.
Okay, through.
So to take something to offer to completely a different, lack of a better word, nation government, why are we giving it to them when we pay all the expenses and say, here, you have it too?
Okay,
There should be a markup, because the people of Powell River are paying for the whole system, the pumping system, everything else.
Through the chair, if I might respond, this land, whether it's owned by anybody, they pay property taxes and all the same user fees. So this is actually not treaty lands or treaty settlement lands. This is private fee simple lands. So they pay
taxes?
They currently do. Thank you.
That's the first time that anybody's mentioned that. It should be public knowledge. So they're just going to pay the same rates?
Through the chair, regardless of ownership, it is land within the city, and it has all the same fees and charges that any one of us pays with property taxes, etc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions from the audience? I'll move now. Do we have anybody online? Okay, that would appear to be the end of the public clarification session. We have a motion to adjourn.
We're reconvening into closed.
Oh.
Looked like we were at the end of the agenda.
Oh, I thought we were at the.
Oh, okay.
You got through the agenda there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
Seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much, everybody that came out.